All right, well, we'll go ahead and start. It looks like there's still some people kind of joining, but we can go ahead and start with intros and, our general information stuff. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I know it's kind of a crazy time of year. Hey, Denise. There's a lot going on. I know we all have lots of reports and that type of thing. We're trying to finish up by the end of the year. So I appreciate your time being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Morgan. I'm one of the program specialists here at the Nebraska Arts Council. The way our agenda and our time will work today is we're going to hear an update from Suzanne Wise, our Executive Director at the Nebraska Arts Council. We're going to hear from Katie Broman, the Executive Director at the Omaha Community Playhouse, and from Kimberly Faith Hickman, who is the Artistic Director at the Omaha Community Playhouse. We will have time for questions. If you don't feel comfortable unmuting and talking, feel free to type them into the chat. We can monitor that. Otherwise, we're pretty laid back. So, feel free to unmute that mic and hop in with questions. That's completely okay. After that, we'll break into small groups. This is a time for you guys to connect as arts administrators. If you need a prompt, you can talk about the virtual events that you're doing. I know most of you, and you probably don't need a prompt. So just talk about whatever it is that you want to. If you want to ask questions, if you need to get advice from your peers, this is a great time to do that and to make those connections. When we're done there, I'll bring you back at the end just for a little bit of closing. And we'll keep all of it at an hour or under, because like I said, everybody's time is really valuable, especially at the end of the year, right? We're all running in different directions. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Suzanne.
Thanks, Rachel, and hello, everyone. It's great to see you, or at least see your names up. Yeah, I don't know about you, but we're busier than we've ever been. It's just kind of crazy. And I see a lot of nodding heads, and yeah, who knew? Anyway, I wanted to tell you about a couple of things, and I've mentioned a couple of these before, but just want to reiterate, you're going to be seeing a lot more information as our marketing campaign launches about the arts license plates. So they will be coming out as of January 1st. And you can look on our website. You can look at Facebook or other social media that we do that will give you a link so you can go in and apply for a license plate, either immediately, in which case they give you a credit for your other plate, or wait until your plates want to renew. The cool thing about it, it's only $5 more. And they're a lot cooler than probably what you have on your car right now, unless you've got a Mountain Lion or something like that. You can also get a specialty plate, and they're $40, which is cheaper than a Husker plate, which is $70. So there you go. The money goes to support grants for our upcoming cultural districts. And yeah, the higher we can get a pool of funds, the more money we'll be able to grant out to those cultural districts. So it's kind of exciting. Another thing that is on our website is if you're doing I know, looking at all of you, you're doing virtual events, and we're just providing you with an extra way of marketing those. And that is, there's a form on our website that you fill out with your event, and anyone that comes to our website will be able to access that and see what you're doing. So that, again, is just for you to use as you see fit in any of your marketing campaigns for your virtual programs, which, by the way, I can't see them all, but I've been so impressed with the work you're doing. It's pretty amazing. I think at some point we're going to have to kind of dial back and think about what this means for our field, and what's going to happen even when things are quote unquote back to normal. something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think it's part of a national conversation as well. Arts Advocacy Day is coming up, and that's February 17th and 18th. And again, it's virtual, of course, but I think there's going to be some interesting webinars that have to do with advocacy. And again, for those of you that are not members, please support Nebraskans for the Arts. They proved their worth. They got the cultural districts through. They got the license plates through. They're working on an arts therapy bill that has required a lot of babysitting, something that we can't do to the degree that Nebraskans for the Arts can do. The longtime director, Doug Zabillet, is going to be retiring at the end of the month. As many of you know, Doug had a health scare a year ago. His wife has also had health scares in the past. And I think they both decided, hey, it's time to kick back. So they're going to be spending their winters in Florida and the rest of the year in Nebraska. But there is a new interim director named Skylar Dykes, who is a recent graduate from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, young, full of energy, just what we all need, someone to say, you go girl, get it done, she can do it. And so the board of Nebraskans for the Arts, I'm sure, will be putting out a call for a new director shortly. Arts Advocacy Day is February 18th. I think there's some events on the 17th, and that's still in the process of being figured out. And then finally, for the artists that you know in your communities, we are working on a collaborative project with our regional organization, Mid-America Arts Alliance out of Kansas City. They have an arts entrepreneurship program called Artists Inc. And they have now expanded that into Artists Inc. Express. And that is for states like ours that have like one or two big population areas and the rest of the state is pretty underserved. And so Artists Inc. is meant for those urban areas because, you know, it's pretty intensive learning, you know, how to market yourself, how to speak the language of marketing, how to develop yourself as an entrepreneur, those sorts of things. And so you develop a cohort in a series of sessions. And so if you don't live close to where the sessions are being held, it can become problematic. So they've now figured out a way to do this virtually. And so we are going to be partnering with them to do Artists Inc. Express, which is shorter time frames, but it can be done virtually. And our aim here is to develop cohorts in the rest of the state. So for example, Northeast Nebraska, picking out organizations in Northeast Nebraska like the Norfolk Arts Center and Wayne State College that can help us identify artists that this would be very helpful to them. And it's not just visual artists. They can be actors, they can be dancers, choreographers, writers. It's a huge span of artistic disciplines. So again, that will be launching in the new year. And I'm just giving you all a heads up because we'll be asking you to help us publicize this. So any questions about any of this? I have, of course, not been looking at the chat. No, Rachel has been putting some helpful links on there. But if you've got a question or anything, just let me know. If not, I'm anxious to hear what's going to be said today. So thank you and best wishes for the holidays for all of you.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne. And if you guys think of questions later, feel free to pop them in the chat. And you guys, you know, you can always get a hold of us at any time. You know, if it's tomorrow and you think, oh, I meant to ask this, you can always send us an email. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kimberly and Katie.
Thank you so much. And Thanks for having us as your guest today. I see a lot of names that I know, even though everybody has their cameras off. Not everybody, but so we're going to be talking today about how we reimagined A Christmas Carol during the COVID times and how we're streaming it. Back in March when everything started to get really crazy with this, I was super naive and I was like, we have to close for these 2 weeks. We have to cancel these shows and we have to cancel our gala. And then mid-April, we're going to be back at it and it's going to be so hard, but we're going to do it, and then we started realizing that, oh, it's going to be longer than that. And I made the comment at one point, I said, as we didn't know what our programming was going to be in the short term, I said, well, everybody just in the production staff work on A Christmas Carol because we know we're going to do A Christmas Carol. And if we can't do A Christmas Carol, we are in trouble. And then time marched on. And July, Kimberly and I had a meeting with some of our board members on the Playhouse patio. And we were like, okay, we keep waiting for things to change, we just need to completely reprogram and put together a season up through about February with small cast shows. And we're actually now reprogramming for the rest of the year, and we'll be announcing that as soon as we have all of the royalties. But when we talked about A Christmas Carol, we were saying, okay, we have to still try to do this in some way, but how do you do a show that's so important to the community that typically has over 40 people in the cast and a large crew and tours around the country? And in walks Kimberly and says, I think we can do this. And so I'll pass it over to her to talk about that reimagining process. And then I can talk about streaming. And Kimberly, you just let me know when you want me to share my screen.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having us. My name is Kimberly Faith Hickman. I'm the outgoing artistic director at the Playhouse. My last day is actually next week. And it was a great privilege to be able to end my tenure here with this particular production. So as Katie said, we went through a lot of conversations with the season and what we were going to be doing. But when it came to A Christmas Carol, I just couldn't let us go a winter without doing it in some capacity. And the way I've thought about COVID, honestly, is I feel like, in theater, if anyone took theater classes, you all take an improv class at some point. And improv is all about learning how to cope when things don't go as planned. And 2020, things are not going as planned. And so all of my improv classes have greatly paid off in this year. So I thought, why not reimagine A Christmas Carol? The staff are creative professionals. If anyone can do this, we can do this. And so I met with Jeffrey Jones, who is the son of Charles Jones, and Charles Jones created this adaptation for the Playhouse. And Jeffrey and I met and talked about various ways we could do this. Could it be a one-person Christmas Carol? Could it be a three-person Christmas Carol? Then it grew to a five-person Christmas Carol, and then it grew to an eight-person Christmas Carol, and we stopped there. The things we talked about were what was going to be comforting to our audience, especially after a year like 2020. What did we need to maintain in the production that was going to provide that comfort? And the first thing that we started with was our Scrooge. Jerry Lange has been playing Scrooge for about 16 years now. He is an actor here in Omaha that came to the Playhouse when we were touring A Christmas Carol with the Nebraska Theater Caravan. We did take this year off for touring, but we were still able to do our main stage production. So we thought Jerry is the most familiar face right now for A Christmas Carol. Let's start with Jerry. So as we reimagined what the rest of the show would look like, we knew that we wanted to keep Jerry just playing one role as Scrooge, and then everyone else would play multiple roles throughout the show. So Kate, if you want to go ahead and start sharing the screen, I will talk through sort of how we went about it and then show you some side-by-side comparisons of that's the end, of what the show looks like compared to what it traditionally does. So we'll go to the first, there we go, yep. So this is our first slide, just showing that we're streaming now, who created the adaptation, and you'll get a little glimpse into what this year's production looks like. And let's go to the next one. So typically speaking, we have over 40 actors. Christmas Carol is really well known for having lots and lots of kids. Usually I cast around 20, sometimes I cast more. In this casting, since I've been in this role, I've cast anywhere from 40 to 52 actors in our main stage production. We usually have 20 or more crew members and then 10 or more orchestra members, depending on the rotation of substitute orchestra members and things like that. This year, we cut it down to 8 actors. 2 were under the age of 16. We had 7 crew members and then 2 orchestra members. So of the 8 actors, 7 played all the other roles, including the kids, and then Jerry Launch just played Scrooge. As we blocked the show, we kept social distance and safety as our primary goal. The rehearsal room and the stage itself had 6-foot markers all over the floor. So everything was spaced out 6 feet apart so that the actors could always know where they would safely be at 6 feet away from their scene partner at all times. So as you'll see on the left, this is a street scene that typically is a group number with all the men in the cast. This year we only had 3 men doing this song. And there they are on the right, all spread out and spaced apart. And you'll also see a little bit of difference in the background because we had to reduce our crew significantly for safety backstage. We had to reduce our set pieces significantly as well. Our design changed pretty dramatically this year so that we could have safety in mind. Usually we have 4 different buildings and a street drop. This year we had no buildings and 1 brand new beautiful street drop that we painted over the summer and incorporated into the show. So that's one example there. We'll go to the next slide. The county house is another example. This particular picture on your left is Scrooge and the Charity Men and their iconic backbend blocking. This backbend has been in existence for, gosh, I think about 30 years. And this is the first year we couldn't do the backbend because as you can see, they're very close together. So my goal was to, again, give the audience something familiar, yet keep safety in mind. So you see one of the actors on the right going into the backbend, and then the other Charity Man hiding behind Bob Cratchit's desk over there in the corner. So that was just my way to tribute what the blocking has traditionally been while adjusting for what we needed to do this year. You'll also see on the left, there is a building there with a window frame, and this year we had to do without that. So we just had the desk for the counting house and did it in front of the street drop with a different lighting adjustment so that we could suggest more of an intimate interior. Next scene. I would say one of the biggest changes, if you are used to seeing A Christmas Carol, when we have a cast of over 40 people, our party scenes are quite large. They're usually full cast numbers or nearly full cast numbers. And this year we had to stick to just the 8 people. So on the left, you will see a shot of the Fezziwig party as it's traditionally done. We do one particular song called Suzanne, which is a personal favorite of mine and a lot of other people. And everyone's holding hands. It's a really lovely, intimate number in the show that we had to reimagine this year. And so you'll see on the right, all of the actors are spread out 6 feet apart. And we had 0 touching in this particular number this year. And I think our choreographer, Michelle Garrity, did a really beautiful job of restaging this particular number to suggest the idea and desire of wanting to physically connect and hold hands with people, but not actually being able to. Because we were so low on cast numbers this year, we also incorporated kids into this scene, which we never have done before. And our two kids, who you'll see on the far right and far left of the circle, we're very honored to be a part of this scene this year, because it's not something they've gotten to do in the past. So that was quite a lovely adjustment, really, for all of us to be able to see how much it meant to them to be with the grown-ups in the grown-up scene this year. And the next slide, you'll see another big adjustment. So typically Bob Cratchit is known for having a lot of kids. This year he only had 3, 2 of which were the actual children. So as you will see, of the 2 kids, the child playing Tiny Tim, who's sitting on the bench, and then on the picture on the right, the child in the back behind the table is the other kid that we cast. And they played all the roles of Bob Cratchit's children. So all of the lines that were typically split up between 5 or 6 kids were assigned to those 2. So rather than Tiny Tim and having a separate Belinda Cratchit, a Frances Cratchit, Peter Cratchit, and Martha Cratchit, most of the lines all went to Tiny Tim and Peter Cratchit. So one of the ways that Jeffrey and I approached this adaptation was reassigning character lines, rather than having these child actors flip back and forth between characters. We didn't want it to get too ridiculous in that way. We thought that reassigning would be easier. So that's what we did. And you'll see in the blocking, again, distance between the actors for this year compared to really close-knit, intimate physicality in previous years. And this was something that was challenging for all of us. Some of the actors in the show have been in A Christmas Carol before, so they really had to adjust to not connecting in a way that's physical. But I think we managed to do a good job of still suggesting that intimacy, suggesting that connection with our alternative blocking. And certainly Jim Mothus's beautiful lighting helped this as well to make it still feel intimate, even though they couldn't hug and sit in each other's laps the way that we normally would. And we'll go to the next slide. So Tiny Tim being carried around is very traditional in A Christmas Carol. Bob Cratchit usually carries him on his shoulders. This year we couldn't do that, so we had Bob Cratchit pull him around on a sled. Scrooge at the end of the show, with Tiny Tim's famous line of "God bless us everyone," usually holds him up in the air, and Tiny Tim holds his crutch out. And this year we had to keep them apart. And so you'll see the differences between the 2 different scenes there with the actors, and these are the same actors both years actually. And so we found a way again to try to honor the spirit of that original blocking of Tiny Tim feeling very optimistic and hopeful and wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, while keeping him safely on the ground and Scrooge safely across from him. And you'll see how we made that adjustment there. Our rehearsal process consisted of everyone being masked the entire time. We didn't take them off until we started teching the show for film. And then the actors were also gloved the entire time. And the actors wore gloves throughout the show as well, just in case we did have some prop handoffs that we needed to do. And we wanted to try to keep everyone as safe as possible. So we had everyone in gloves for every costume that they wore. A lot of the costume changes took place on stage this year, which is not typical. Jeffrey and I wanted to show that these actors were playing multiple roles. So we found ways in the scene changes to incorporate quick changes. Our costume designer came up with a layering concept where each character had a layer of another character showing throughout the production. And so they could just take one off, put another one on. And I thought that was a really clever way for us to keep in mind that these are actors playing all these different roles, and just suggesting the little bits of every character they're going to be playing throughout the evening. But it also worked very efficiently for the practicality of the quick changes as well. We did make a lot of cuts to the show. Typically the big party scenes, as I showed earlier, are almost full cast numbers. There's one party scene where they're all chasing each other around and playing a game. And since we didn't have that this year, we just cut that scene entirely. So our adaptation process really was a matter of what was important to keep in terms of comfort for the audience, what was important to keep in regard to integrity of the message of A Christmas Carol, and then what could we reassign or cut or just rewrite entirely. And it was very much like putting a puzzle together. And once we had that down, we took a look at the set to see the same thing. What did the audience expect to see year after year? The ghost of Jacob Marley entering Scrooge's fireplace is a very iconic image that we wanted to keep. So we kept the fireplace, but we didn't keep the rest of the walls in Scrooge's bedroom. So that's an example of how we worked with regard to the design. For the lighting, we took a similar approach to that as well. Jim Othus, who's our resident scenic and lighting designer, he actually designed a repertory lighting plot for us this year. And so since we've been using that for all the shows we've been doing so far on the main stage, we made some adjustments to specify for A Christmas Carol, but we did have to really kind of take on a new lighting design in some ways because of time and efficiency with regard to the staff. We've been working with lean numbers around here as we've been trying to have less people in the building to keep everyone safe. And so it really was a very collaborative process for all of us. We worked really closely with Jeffrey, Charles's son, to make sure we were still getting his father's intentions correct. That was something really important to us. And also, again, providing comfort for the community so that when they watch this, they see that it's different. They see how we've changed things, but they're still walking away with the same message and the same heart and soul that they're used to seeing. And I feel very good about how we went about it. The cast was really fantastic. They were so invested in giving this to the community. And I'm incredibly proud and humbled to have gone through this process with them because they're just fantastic people. And this truly was a labor of love for everyone involved. And then the next slide, God bless us, everyone. And I'll take any questions, or Katie, if you want to jump into the streaming component.
Yeah, I guess any questions before we go on to the second half of it? Okay, so then we have been approaching this season in kind of a two-part way. We've been offering live performances. We started doing those in the building again at the end of September. We had been doing drive-in parking lot shows all summer prior to that. And so at we worked on COVID protocols and all sorts of things to reopen. And so we reopened at the end of September with a one-person show called Grounded. But in addition to that, we also purchased the rights to be able to stream the show. And so the first 3 shows back in our building, we offered both in-person options as well as streamed options. And with the streaming options, we could have done it one of 3 ways: live streaming, on demand, or scheduled content. So basically you watch it online at 7:30 on a Friday night. We decided to go with on demand, and we got bids from 3 local videographers and ended up hiring a man by the name of Jay Shrigley, who's also a performer. He's done shows at the Playhouse. Most recently, he was Daddy Warbucks and Annie, but actually one of the shows he was in, Bright Star, was canceled due to COVID, which Mike Markey, who's on the call, is also in that cast. And so what happens is Jay comes in during one of the final dress rehearsals. He has a 3-camera setup. He has some stationary cameras and a moving one, and gets a professional grade video with professional audio, and takes about a week to turn it around. He edits, gets closed captioning. And so we open our streamed productions about a week after our in-person production opens. And so that was the intention with A Christmas Carol, as well as our other holiday show, which is a Christmas concert called Christmas in My Heart, featuring Camille Matoyer Moten, which is really lovely. And our intent intention was to both stream and offer in-person performances. The streaming has been a great option because even though we've made a lot of changes indoors, so everybody is distanced by 6 feet in the audience, we put that requirement in place even when that wasn't part of the state directed health measures. We just felt like that was a safe option. Everybody is masked. We have all sorts of additional protocol, and we have gotten nothing but great feedback about those additional steps. But we wanted to offer something for people who aren't comfortable coming back into the building, which we know is a lot, because really our in-person audiences have been pretty small, which is completely understandable. And so that was the goal with A Christmas Carol and Christmas in My Heart. We had to delay the opening of A Christmas Carol by a couple of weeks because of COVID complications with our own cast and the people involved with the production. It bumped the timeline back. And so we started realizing, okay, this is going to become more complicated with this bigger cast. We decided when cases and hospitalizations were at their peak in November to move completely to streaming. So at that point, you know, we had already pushed the opening date back twice. We were on the brink of teetering into the red zone, which would have put us at a 10-person capacity rather than a 25% capacity, which was still doable with what we were doing. So we made the difficult decision to move completely online. And ever since then, the DHMs have gotten less restrictive, but we still feel good about the decision that we made. And so we've used a platform called Showtix for You for our streaming. It's not necessarily the most intuitive, but the reason that we went with that platform was some of the licensing houses mandated it or strongly encouraged it. And we knew that we'd be working with those licensing houses at one point or another. And so we thought that it was probably best to pick one platform and stick with it, because as we go, people will become more familiar with it. And the people who have been streaming have really been our subscribers, choosing to shift their in-person tickets to the streamed option, or people who have already purchased tickets. We've had some single ticket purchases, but it's really more of the loyal patrons of the Playhouse. And so our box office is always ready with questions. I know the Rose, I think, is using Showtix for You. I just got my streamed link for their virtual Christmas production. And so it's been, it hasn't been without, I guess, glitches, but really for being a completely different way to present productions, it's been a pretty smooth process. So any questions so far for me or Kimberly?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how does the Showtix for You coincide with your current ticketing system? Are they like merged in the way that it kind of logs all of your patron base and purchase history, or how do you kind of coincide those two?
It's separate, so they are not synced up. We use Tessitura for our database, and so it is on the back end more manual entry by the box office, and you know, the capacity of streaming, it hasn't been so large that it's unachievable to do that. But no, they are separate platforms.
And do you charge a different rate, I assume, than what your in-person rate is, or do you keep it the same, or how's your ticketing working?
We've been keeping it slightly lower to the same. So with our earlier shows, we did about $10 cheaper. And, you know, we offered, like I said, the streaming a week later, and we have to stop streaming when the show closes. With a typical show too, that's the stipulation of the licensing house. Now with our 2 Christmas shows, we're gonna offer them until January 3rd, because Jeffrey Jones is the rights holder for A Christmas Carol, and so he was in favor of that. And then for Camille's show, you know, we didn't have to work with a licensing house, and so we made the decision to keep prices somewhat similar. So for Christmas Carol, they're the same price, and for Christmas in My Heart, just because, you know, it's not the same experience, but the same amount of work and investment went into putting it up. We've worked with a company out of Colorado Springs called TRG, that is a consulting group on, you know, for marketing, box office development for theater in general. And we've had to pause their services this year because of our budget shortfalls, but they were really encouraging that you don't sell yourself short on the streaming side, and you even look at dynamic pricing for streaming. So, you know, after you hit a certain goal, perhaps prices increase. Now, we didn't do that as much, but what we did do with the Christmas Carol that we hadn't for previous shows is we offered 3 different price points. So a single person viewing, a double person viewing, and 4 or more, or like a family person viewing. They don't get any more links. They don't really, you know, there's nothing different between the viewings, but some people, I hope you've all experienced this. We've just experienced an enormous amount of generosity during this difficult time, but people see that and they think, okay, well, I've got my whole family watching it. We'll go ahead and pay the higher price because we're still paying less than we would have in person. So we've had some success with that different price rate for A Christmas Carol and Christmas in My Heart.
There were a couple questions in the chat about planning for sick cast members or how to handle an outbreak that I can talk about. So we, as Katie mentioned, we delayed our opening twice. 2 cast members had close contact situations that happened outside of the Playhouse. And it's an interesting thing to have to navigate. They, luckily, because of the protocols we had taken in rehearsal, none of us were in close contact with these people because everyone was 6 feet apart or more while they were in our building. But because of their own situations outside the building, they did have to go into quarantine. So we had 2 actors on Zoom. For one was for 2 weeks, and the other was it ended up being a little over 2 weeks. Because COVID kind of went through her family. And so she ended up being quarantined for 18 days. And it was an interesting challenge to have some of your cast in person, some of them on Zoom. Luckily, I had a fantastic directing fellow. We have a directing fellowship here. He jumped in and he physically played all the roles on stage while the actors' voices were coming over the screen. So that was one thing we did. We did talk a lot about double casting. We talked a lot about understudies. We opted not to go that direction for a couple of reasons. With double casting and the design costs for costuming, particularly since they're all playing multiple characters, we didn't want to increase our budget in that way. With understudies, because all of our actors are volunteers, I didn't have the heart to have an understudy and then say, you know what, you may never get to go on, you know, that I would have to give them a performance opportunity. It just feels cruel to me otherwise. And so, so we made the decision to not double cast and not do understudies for those reasons. And we knew that if something went beyond the circumstances that we had, then we would just have to stop and hold for the amount of time the CDC required and then come back to it. That's the decision we made. And I know it may not be for everyone, but that's how we approached it.
We've had, I'm sure you guys have too, there's just been so much learning over the last 6 months. And I don't think I ever went to the CDC's website before March, and now we frequent it. And there was at one point, one of the cast members had to go into quarantine because of a close contact exposure. And, you know, he tested negative and this, and they were masked. And if you have looked at the CDC guidelines. It's sort of like, doesn't matter, doesn't matter, doesn't matter. And so I was on the phone one day with Douglas County Health, like trying to negotiate our way out of his quarantine. I'm like, now what if we get him a rapid test every 24 hours? And so long as it keeps coming back negative, I'm sure that his viral load wouldn't be high enough to get anybody infected, you know, and they're like, oh no, that's not how it works. And since then, the CDC has come up with looser quarantine guidelines for close contact exposure, but that wasn't the case at that time. And so we have, you know, we've really been trying to follow the CDC. We also, as you saw in the photos, opted not to do masks for performers. Now, everybody else is masked, the crew, the audience, staff, and they are masked in rehearsal. And the orchestra is masked if they're not playing an instrument where they have to use their mouth. And that was our big reason for the social distancing, the 6-foot distancing, because by keeping that distance, we're still in compliance with Omaha's mask mandate, and we're in compliance with the CDC. Now, we all believe that, you know, that masks are safer, but we chose, in most situations, we just chose to have that blocking and that distancing instead of doing the masks. I know that some places have done masks and some do both. And I keep referencing Julie, not to put her on the spot with anything, but I know that the Rose has taken a slightly different approach, and we stay in communication about what each other are doing. But yeah, so that was in our Drew Theater too, since it's a much more intimate space. When we were doing shows in there, and when we do shows in there, we have plexiglass around the stage, just as an added layer of protection between the performer and the audience, because again, we don't have them masked in that space. Other questions?
Hi, it's Denise from the Merriman and Kearney. Couple questions about how has your capacity been on streaming? I mean, because you're running still right now, like every night, how many people are tuning in, and how has that all gone?
Yeah, so gosh, on the earlier numbers are going to come to me more quickly since those shows have opened and closed. So our first show that we did, we had about 100 streams. So it was, you know, a low amount, but enough to make it seem worth it. One thing that has been nice about all of this is our streaming costs have been covered by CARES Act money in 2020 because it's a COVID mitigation cost. And so the filming as well as the platform costs have been covered. Now, that's not the case in 2021, and we have already decided that we'll continue to stream. And we'll try to find underwriting for it. There's already been a grant written that we're waiting on. But what we were finding with our earlier shows is that we were kind of at the break-even point for cost of streaming, and then revenue earned, but also revenue retained. So the subscription dollars that we didn't have to refund, with those two elements, we were breaking even, and we felt like keeping engaged with our audience was important enough to take on that cost. I'm going to pull up just really quickly to be able to tell you our most recent report numbers on Christmas Carol streaming. Now, we typically have about 15,000 people see the show in person, and that's just in our theater, not in the venues that we tour to. And so far, it looks like we've had about, as of earlier this week, 250 streams for the show, I believe. So I mean, a big difference, right? And you don't know how many people are streaming with that. So that was, again, those were per links, and I'm not looking at how they broke down price-wise with households. So there could be a 6-person family with one of those streams, but it's a huge difference. we also started to, we're offering this content to our venues that we tour to throughout the country. And our different venues have basically a referral code that they can give to their patrons to enter in, and then they get a percentage back to them. So it's just another way to help us spread the word there and get more streams. But yeah, this is A Christmas Carol Between the Tour and the Main Stage production is probably about 20% of our revenue in a normal year. And this is a big, big change. We decided back in July when we had that meeting, Kimberly and I on the patio with board members, we said, if we continue to try to program, it's not going to be because we're making money, right? Like this is not going to be a revenue generator, no matter how you slice it. We're going to face big deficits. So we either make the decision to program, to keep in front of people, to keep offering programming to maintain relevancy, or we decide to close. And we made the decision at that time that we would continue to try to offer theater or music or whatever our programming is, to maintain relevancy. And not to say that, somebody who's made an opposite decision isn't maintaining relevancy, but that was our decision. It wasn't budget based. Perhaps it has had the opposite effect on the budget, but we still feel like it's important.
Good question.
Michael Markey.
Hi guys, good to see you, and
Mike.
congratulations on what you've been able to do. My question is this: have you guys, because you've obviously had to deal with this a lot, thought about even what will happen even once we go back to in-person productions? For those people who will probably remain leery about being in a crowd, do you see streaming as a continuing option for your audience members until they do feel comfortable getting back into the theater, or you see it as just, we'll go back to in-person, that will be it?
I see it as an option through the end of this year for sure. It's kind of hard for me and probably for many to predict what it's going to be like past the end of the season. When I say this year, I mean through June 30th, that's the end of our season. I was just having that conversation with my husband right before this call of what will the fall look like. I had a conversation with a doctor a few weeks ago that said, by the fall, things are going to be good. Like you can start programming as normal. But again, what does normal mean? Like we know that we can keep requiring masks and we're fine with that on the audience side. We know that we can produce theater with people 6 feet apart, right? It decreases our capacity dramatically, so impacts the budget, but we know we can do it. Where it gets really difficult is on the performer side of things, because that's, if we want to start doing larger casts, social distancing is harder. And so that's where we're going to have more unknowns. I think that so long as the licensing houses offer the streaming option, and so long as there are people who don't feel comfortable coming into the theater, and so long as we have the funding to cover it, I would be in favor of continuing to offer streaming.
Okay, good, thank you. That's it.
Can I just ask, is the show ticks for you through just one royalty house? Is that or is that kind of through a number of the royalty houses? Is it like MTI, RNH, all of them, and Concord, or?
Well, it's a separate platform, so you can use it for any of the licensing houses, or if it's a show that doesn't have a license associated with one of those houses. The two that either required it, encouraged it were MTI and Dramatists. But yeah, we did a Concord show that we used it for. We've done 3 shows now that weren't associated with the licensing houses that we used them for. And we talked about, one of the bummer things about streaming is that there's some people who they don't want to watch it on their computer or their iPad, and perhaps don't have a TV that's equipped to stream, or don't know how to set it up. And so we looked at some other options to get around that, and looked at Vimeo, but really, you still have to have an app. And we looked at Amazon Prime, and they were going to take 50% of sales by doing it that way. And I said, okay, well, what would be our motivation for switching? It's to make it more accessible and to make it easier for people, and do Vimeo and Amazon Prime really broaden our base at all? And we decided no. And so, I mean, it'd be great to have an option that was a little bit more easier or comfortable for people, although people are getting the hang of it. I know the symphony, they're having their concert broadcast through WWT. I don't think it's aired yet, but later this month, which is, you know, such a cool option. And that obviously has a lot more of a, you know, broad reach, although there's limitations to that too, because it's for one night rather than being able to choose over 6 or 7 weeks. And, you know, it's not a paid platform. So it's nice to have streaming. It's certainly not a perfect solution.
Hello, I just have one question pertaining to the music. How were you able to adapt the score to work with the 2-person orchestra?
So our music director, Jim Bogus, who's been on staff here for many, many years, he actually handled all of that. So he's been a part of A Christmas Carol. He actually came to the Playhouse as a touring actor for A Christmas Carol. So he's very familiar with the show. And so he personally took that on to do a couple of rearrangements for having only 2. So we had a piano and a harp. Those were the 2 instruments that we had, and he handled all of that himself. And there were a couple of songs as well that when we were casting, we had to make sure that we had, you know, certain vocal parts covered, because, and to make up for the lack of instruments, he wanted to make sure we had that certain sound with the actors' voices as well. So that was another component to making up for less instruments in the pit. Was making sure he just had the right sound overall, including their voices to contribute to that.
Thank you. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah. He did an amazing job. We were able to keep, nearly every song, and we were able to keep every song in the show, regardless of if we still had it sung by the actors or if we used it for underscore. Again, it was a part of that familiarity and comfort for the audience that we really wanted to retain for people. And so if there was, usually there's a big polka number in Act 2, and we did not polka at all this year, but we kept that music and we used it for some other scene changes. And so again, it was one slight difference. If you've seen the show before, you know, oh, that music's usually here instead, and now it's here. And but it was a fun way. It was another part of the puzzle for us to put together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions? This has been great. Thank you, guys. We're going to take a few minutes and split into small groups. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I do want you guys to be able to have that time to make connections if you need it and if you need to talk, right? And unburden. Chad's going to split us up and we'll bring you back later. All right, welcome back, everybody. So just thank you to Katie and to Kimberly. This was fantastic. Thank you for kind of, oh, look, I'm going to get punny on you for pulling the curtain back. Oh, yay. Mark your calendars for January 20th, our next water cooler, and I'll send out a reminder, but we are going to talk with Omaha Performing Arts and with Film Streams about some of the work that they've been doing with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's going to be really good, really, really interesting. I'm going to send you guys out a really short survey today just to help us keep planning and to keep offering things that are of interest to you and that you want to hear about. Oh, one of the things that came up, if you click that link to the license plate and you don't see ours yet, it's because technically it's not available till January 1st. So January 1st, go crazy, go wild, get your license plate. All right. Everybody have a wonderful holiday. Thank you for joining, and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
Happy holidays, everyone. Stay safe.